Yes, I can. But it would,
Thank you.
I think it would be nice if she can go on like a tour, like maybe 4 or 6 or 8 different Rotary meetings. I think that would be very powerful for her and for us.
And here's an off the wall thought. What might it take for the district to purchase a recording from her of her doing the poem, and then you
It's
could
already online. The recording is already online.
well, but
Oh, it is.
then you might use that if it would fit as the introduction to your DG visits to the clubs.
We're covering quite. I'm still trying to trim down the talk. So,
but Ed, we're members of your district. We're here to help.
I appreciate that, Doug. And I am promoting this group and the work we're doing because this is the important stuff. We're at an inflection here in history, and if Rotary is going to remain relevant, this is the work we got to be doing.
Absolutely.
All right, do you want to get started? Al can get us started. Sorry, Ed, go ahead.
Oh, how many people did attend? Did you ask that already, Khadija?
Go ahead, ask again, because no, not everybody was here.
Okay, how many people attended the webinar this morning at 10 o'clock? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, cool. For those of you who didn't, it was well worth it. I am so impressed with Rotary. They're really serious about this and really giving it top, really, it's top priority. John Yuko, the General Secretary, was supposed to be there. Unfortunately, his mother passed away, so he was not there, but his number 2 person was there as part of this. But there's a real commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI as they're phrasing it, talking about women in Rotary, women in leadership. And here in the United States, I think we're sitting at about 24% of, no, 27%, I think is where we're at. The world is at 24% of women in Rotary, and they want to get that up to about 30% with a few years out here with a goal. I was with the New Richmond Club yesterday, or Monday, my first official visit with a club, and they're the model. These are the people who need to watch. They're sitting at 50%, women to men, so right across the board, which is where you'd like to see it. And then 50% of their members are under the age of 40. So they're really a model for where we all need to be going to, which was terrific. And the club I'm seeing this afternoon, they're at 50% on women and not so hot on under 40, but it's the E Club, and they're sort of new and reforming, and we'll give them time. They just need to get some of those Rotex kids involved with it is all. So we can.
Are they also tracking white versus non-white, ethnicity or race?
This is what we were tracking, so far, and we didn't have that question in there, but that's another, something else we should start tracking.
I think it's a pretty important one.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that the webinar was recorded and that will be available.
Yeah, thank you, Al. I was going to mention that for those of you who didn't see it, as soon as that comes available, Khadija and Al will kick it out to you, and it's not long, well worth it. A lot of good information, and you can come back and then correct me on the statistics, because I know that 87% of all statistics are made up on the spot. Isn't that right, Bruce?
Actually, it's 82.5, Ed.
82.5.
I use 87.5 myself, so that's my number. For those of you who don't know, I was a statistician at the Mayo Clinic.
That's why I pointed to him.
And in the Air Force.
Very cool. So how do we want to do this? I'm sure we all have read what I sent out. My intent was to get us to start thinking about the experiences of people of color who have occasion individuals call the police on them for just being whatever place they're at. And it's usually very, very painful to watch. The last one, Vicky sent me something about a lady that was sitting in front of a church reading a book, whatever, and the church members came out, asked her to leave, that people like her caused trouble there and stuff. And so for me, it was like us as Americans using the policing our Black community members, our community members of color, and then calling the police on them, and the expectation of what the police do and how this could end up for the person of color. One reason for me guiding this conversation this way is because, first of all, systems are built by people, and people have feelings. That's why laws are set the way they're set, and that's why things are the way they are. It comes from people's emotions, it comes from people's hearts, it comes from people's understandings of each other to start with. So the moment I feel that I am in this position where I can write things, I will write it the way that I will make to make me comfortable, to make me safe. So for me, the reason is I wanted us to look at ourselves individually and then within our families, and then we can expand to clubs. I understand the need to look at systems, but I think I feel that we miss the point every time we look at the system because we're not willing to, first of all, start from the basics. Start from individually, where am I at? Why am I thinking the way I'm thinking? How do I react? Why do I react the way you do? Why I do? So how do I then move from that and then encourage my community and then encourage my the people I vote for? So I'm thinking community begins from me. How my community is shaped by me and how I understand my surroundings and how I want to look at it. And the moment you start to think of people that way, I think then you start to see their humanity.
Khadija?
Yes.
Khadija, we're getting a garbled sound and now we're getting some background sound.
I agree, I can't hear.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. But anybody who's out and needs to mute, please go ahead. So anyway, with that, I will say, like I said, the webinar will be shared. I think I got to the survey and I looked through the answers. A lot more people would like to talk. That is if I don't spend the whole time talking. 70% of the people that stick around, 30%
Khadija, the sound is not good at all. It's gotten worse.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, I'll get closer to my computer. So to limit how much time we talk, you guys can me. Okay. Then okay, I am gonna have to go to my phone and use that. You guys all have the agenda, so how about just talk among yourselves while I figure out my sound, and I'll be right back.
Is there a chance you have a headset you could put on, Khadija?
Yes, I do. I'll go find. I found it. It's right here.
Al, you're muted if you want to talk.
There we go. Thank you. While Khadijah's doing that, I joined late because I'm down in Wyndham, and it took me a while to sign in for some reason, so I apologize for that. Did Khadijah mention the idea of having breakout groups?
If she did, I didn't understand it.
Okay, well, let me do that while she's getting back. We're thinking that people may have different things they are good at or want to do, and that these general discussions are valuable, and I think we're all learning a lot from them, but that at some point, people may want to get into breakout groups and talk about different things that they want to do in the future, that we don't all, I mean, this is a huge group, and that is wonderful, but we don't necessarily all have to want to do the same thing. We aren't necessarily good at the same thing. So what we're thinking is if people in the chat could put down a very short description of a group they would like to be in. And it could be do a PowerPoint presentation, give speeches to clubs, work on a presentation to clubs, do research on statistics, and those are just things off the top of my head. But the idea is that this group ultimately has to do something to get down to the club level, because that is where things happen in Rotary. We can be all as well-intentioned as we want and do things, but if we can't get that into the clubs and to the individual members, then we're missing a chance. So the idea is, if you put that in, then what we will do is we will take those suggestions and send out a survey and see how many people are interested in each concept and working on that. And then we'll try and set up some breakout groups. So any comments on that?
I think that's the right way to go. This is Kevin from the White Bear Club, and I just think that we're taking kind of a scattergun approach to this whole thing. I think we need to really identify the why, how we're going to accomplish the goals,
Right.
and how can we be beneficial to the clubs that it sounds like are not uniformly on the path to having a inclusion committee yet. And so how can the district be beneficial to the clubs to help fashion some of the templates to do this work?
Okay. So put things in the chat if you have an idea, or email us at the 5960 email that Khadijah's been using. Both she and I have access to see that. And in the next couple of days, we'll put together a poll, can't remember what they're called, and send it out to everybody. And we'll see, if an area has one person that's interested, we may say, if you want to work on that, fine, but that's not what we're going to do. But hopefully we'll be able to get down to maybe 3, 4 at the very most areas where we can kind of get a group of people to work on that issue. And ultimately, of course, reporting back to the whole group. I mean, the idea that these wouldn't necessarily be separate committees, but they'd be working groups, report to the whole group. At least that's the idea. See how it goes. Amada, you have your hand raised.
Hi, Al. Thank you. I'm on another in another group about discussing racism, and we met last night, and there was a couple points I thought would be valuable for this group. One of the things that they're talking about is sort of self-reflection on where we are at as individuals in sort of the journey of becoming anti-racist. And so one of the things to think of is, what is our story? Where do we first learn about race? So, so kind of, who was the first person you heard use a racial slur? And how, and then that influenced you, like, if it was your parents or a neighbor or a neighborhood kid. Things to think about, like, how did you first hear that like Black was bad or meant poor or uneducated or, or whatever? And when did you first start to realize white's easier, white means I'm safer, or, white means different things? To kind of take that in your sort of day-to-day life of, where am I at? How did I get here? And then also another thing was reflecting and learning about your own racial history, as in where you came from, so your ancestry, but then also where you came from, where you lived. So like, I was born in Madison, Wisconsin, but who were the people in Madison, Wisconsin before I was born there? Whose land were you born on that was someone else's land? And realizing that our history is back further than just our lifetime, or even our parents or our grandparents. And sort of internalizing all of that messaging to realize you are here now, and now you get to move forward, but with all of that extra thought as to who you are today and how you got here.
Amada, I really like that idea.
That was a lot.
But I was, your story or your explanation threw me back to one of my early stories as a child of sort of realizing that I did have a privilege because I was with somebody that didn't. And I was just a young child at the time. And I think if we did recordings of these and made sort of a composite of them, people in the district, that in the end, if it's edited well and done well, could be a really powerful tool. I'll tell you my story just as an example. I grew up in Wyoming on a very, very poor beet farm. I mean, we were really poor, but somehow we brought in transient workers, migrant workers that would come and hoe the beets for us in the summertime, and they were generally from northern Mexico. And as an extroverted child on the farm, pretty isolated, I was really excited when they'd come, especially if they had children that I could play with. But one time I was with my mom and one of the Hispanic mothers, and we went to a used store, and the woman wanted to buy a sewing machine. I think it was a treadle sewing machine. My mother insisted that she stay in the car and she'd go in and buy the sewing machine. And I didn't understand what that transaction was all about. And she came back out and said that she's got the sewing machine for her. And then somehow the woman in the store found out who it was for and said that she would have charged a lot more if she'd known it was for the woman from Mexico. And I was shocked at the time. That was the first time I experienced that. So it was an awakening for me.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think we could do something that could be very powerful, telling our stories.
I
I
agree.
kind of like the idea, partly because we probably have really different stories. Without going too long, I mean, I was originally grew up in the only state located south of the Mason-Dixon line that did not secede from the Union, which is Maryland. But I also grew up in a really different environment in that I never did learn that other folks were bad, as you call it. I mean, it just that just wasn't how things went in our particular household. Probably the first time I ever heard, and I never even put it together until much later, the famous N-word was in the famous childhood nursery rhyme of Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo, which by the time my kids came along had changed a good number of its lines. But and my first real introduction to, some of that came early in my college days. There was a book written in about 1960 or 1961 called Black Like Me, in which a white reporter from New York managed to somehow, I don't know, he sat in a bathtub full of tea or something, but managed to turn his skin very dark and spent an extended period of time in the late 50s traveling with a white friend and I think a black companion as well through the South. And that was one of the things that really had a major influence on just sort of my general thinking about some of this. The whole reflection on things like the fact that, yeah, you do have an advantage because you didn't have to start quite as far back in the line are things I didn't really come to understand and realize until a great deal later in my own life. But I think we all started from some very, very different places. And at least mine doesn't strike, sometimes seems to me like it was a little strange. My dad was from a long line of New England Puritans, and I can recall him telling me about our ancestors saying, remember, Douglas, your ancestors came to this country to establish or to practice religious freedom and to prevent everyone else from doing the same. Those of you that are history buffs know that the end result of that was Rhode Island. But so, I think this idea of, what are people's stories? Because much like any other group of people, white folks aren't one one single amalgamated group of people that all think alike. One of the things I've been doing is just trying to sort of look around on my own and see what I can find as you know, from Black voices, contemporary Black voices. And I have 3 things to suggest to you if you want to chase them down. One was an op-ed piece written by a poet who's a writer in residence down at Vanderbilt. And it was an op-ed that showed up in the New York Times in late June. And its title was, "You Want a Confederate Monument? My Body is a Confederate Monument." Again, African-American lady. Take the other end of the spectrum. There's a lady by the name of Candace Owens, also Black, who, as best I can tell, has not only drunk the Trump Kool-Aid, but I think she actually mixes it up in the kitchen herself. You know, and the last one I'll pass on to you. There was a Facebook live stream shortly after the George Floyd murder by Trevor Noah, which basically talks about the whole concept of what people perceive as appropriate behavior is based on the fact that there is something of a social contract amongst people in the country. And his contention, and I don't know that I can argue a great deal with him, is if that contract is how people behave and one party of the contract doesn't live up to its end of the bargain, why should the other party? And you know, I'll leave it at that, because it's a deep and, to me, troubling, and equally troubling and fascinating topic that I am still trying to figure out how we're going to wander our way out of it.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do on that then. Unless people really want to keep doing that here, which is fine, but I think the idea of recording these so that we have a kind of a library of them is a good idea, Amada. I like that. But what Doug just did, if he recorded it, would probably be about a gigabyte of recording. And that is going to be hard unless he's got a really good way to compress that. So what I'm going to do, if people agree, is contact the folks that do media at the Rotary level. I know there's a committee on that, and see if they can give us advice on how people can do this, and then distribute that advice to the group. So if people want to do it, they can do it in a way that it's realistically can be shared. I know that 1 billion or 1 gigabyte can be reduced. I just don't know how. Amada, you raised your hand again.
Yeah, I just to kind of sum up this topic, so it sounds like we're going to move on. I think one of the things that's powerful about this isn't so much that we're giving this information to the rest of our Rotary. It's that
it's 4 o'clock.
Sorry, it's that us seeing it together, the people who are working on this, we can all be in like community together to realize, wow, we all have had different experiences with racism. And then we can kind of take a deep breath and then we can move forward together. So not so much to record it for sort of a posterity thing or that we can share it with other people that aren't here, but so that we all know, we can all build the trust together on this. I can look at you and say, okay, oh yeah, you've had experience like that too. So maybe even next week, you know, everyone could kind of think on it. And if they have like 1 or 2 minutes, just a quick, you know, we don't really need to know how you felt about everything, but just to say, yes, you know, I did the eeny, meeny, miny, mo with the N-word when I was a kid. That's my earliest racism story. And then the next person just goes. I think that would be really, really strong, really powerful to sort of see that comparison for all of us. So what do we think of that for next week? Maybe just a quick share though, just quick.
Mada, I'm cool with this being the thing that we do the entire time. I don't know about others. I like it. Recording on, for us, it's creating this group. It's creating our comfort with each other first so that we can reach out. So if other people hear it or not, really is not for me. The people in this room are very, very important to me. I like this idea. I want to do it the agenda is out that I had, so let's do this. I don't know, Al, what do you think?
Well, I mean, we could do it either way. We could devote next meeting. I mean, I don't think we've got enough time for everybody here to do that, and people haven't had a chance to think about it. But we could either do it as sharing at the group and devote probably the entire meeting to that, and really rely on people to take no more than 2 minutes, because if people get carried away, we won't get to everybody. Or we could do the recording as a library, and certainly what Amada, what you just said is easier to do technically. So I have no objection to that. But what do people think? And I'm only seeing 4 people on my phone. I apologize. I see Bruce raising his hand, but I assume somebody else is keeping track. So I don't want to jump over other people who've been raising their hand if somebody else raised their hand before Bruce, because I shouldn't be doing this. Because, like I say, I can only see Peg, Bruce, Khadija, and Amada. So that's it. So Khadija, did you have somebody else keeping track of who's raising their hand?
I am looking right now, and I don't see anyone.
Okay, well, Bruce, go ahead. And I
I-
apologize if there's somebody else who's been waiting.
All I wanted to say was, does anybody have the technology understanding to, because one way to get around this that I've seen used is you develop like a tweet stream that only participants can quote and can talk into, and you just basically send a tweet that is your statement, and it limits you in length, and it gets away from the pontificating and kind of narrows it right down to the simple statement of. We could try, if anybody knew how to do that, we could try and do it that way.
Well, that's why I was thinking contacting the technology people at the district, because I assume they know how to do all of this stuff.
Let's ask Sean if he knows how, the tech person.
But do people want to do that next meeting?
Yes.
I heard one yes. I'm
I
not
think-
hearing any no's.
Yes,
Oh, I see one more person, yes. Okay.
thumbs up.
Are you okay with that, Khadija? If next meeting we devote that to personal stories?
Yes.
I mean, we'll try and do a little other business, but that'll be the main topic at the next meeting.
Yeah.
But still, remember, send the ideas for breakout groups, because we ultimately want to do that.
Yes.
Because there's just too many people, which is great. I love too many people to really get down to nitty gritty things.
No
we
problem.
need more condensed groups, and people have different interests or different things they're good at. If we say we're all going to work on a presentation to clubs, there may be some people say, I don't know how to do that. I don't like that. And they should still have something they can do. Back to you, Khadija. It sounds like your sound is okay now.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to share the experience?
Ed
Why-
Merrick has a question.
Go ahead.
Who?
Ed?
I thought somebody else was jumping in. I was just going to say that, Al, as far as the breakout rooms go too, the Rotary International Board of Directors is meeting this month. They're going to be coming out with action steps in that they want to release. So that might be something that may help formulate what kind of breakouts we end up with.
Sure.
Did anyone else wanted to share their experience? Amada?
I'll share mine since I didn't share what mine was. When I was little, it was mostly white people in our community. And, but when we would drive around, if we saw a black person, let's say crossing the street or whatever, as little kids, we would say, oh, hey, there's a black guy. And it was the same thing if we saw like a bicycle or, anything that was just something interesting, because that's how kids are, you're just excited. And, oh, hey, look there. That's, I see black people on TV. And my dad would always say, we don't talk about that. Don't say that. And he as an adult must have thought it was a bad thing, but we were just children, just pointing out something that was new and basically exciting. So that was my first instruction with race, was, or skin color, was you don't talk about it, it's rude. And so I, you know, so that made a mark on me. And so my whole life has been colored with the idea of saying it is embarrassing or wrong, or I don't want to admit it. And that's colored all of my, you know, the rest of my life.
Well, I can share a little bit too. I, of course, grew up in the 50s and the 60s. And I grew up with the Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo and the Sambo story and all those. But I never really associated, I don't think I ever really associated that with a particular group of people because I didn't know anybody who was Black or of color. I mean, I grew up in Hopkins. At the time, Hopkins was lily white. And so I don't think I had any really strong feelings, but my first memory of somebody, but I probably did. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't. It was not a big part of my life. I think the first memory I have of somebody making an overtly racist statement was I was watching football with my brother, who was 7 years older than me. And Sandy Stevens was the quarterback for the Gophers. And I speculated, he's pretty good. I wonder if he'll make it into the pros. And my brother said, oh, no, he will never make it into the pros. And I said, well, why not? Why aren't there any Black quarterbacks? And he says, well, because Blacks aren't smart enough. They can play other positions, but the quarterback has to be really smart. And Blacks are not smart enough. And I remember thinking, I don't know if I agree with that. That sounds kind of strange, but he's my older brother. I've not been arguing with him, but I still remember that statement as just like, really, Blacks aren't smart enough to be a quarterback in football. And yet Sandy Stevens pretty darn good. So, that's the first overt statement I remember. But and I became concerned that was not true and that Blacks and other people ought to have a chance. But I probably didn't start recognizing the advantages I got from being white until maybe 20 years ago. So it was kind of and I don't have a key point where there was a sudden realization, but, I went from, thinking that was wrong and that Blacks and all people of color ought to have equal chances and equal opportunities, but I didn't get to the understanding the advantages I had until sometime in the 90s. So it was about a 30-year transition from thinking that, people should be equal to realizing I had that advantage. So that's my story.
Thank you, Al.
My brother's dead, by the way, so I can't have that discussion with him now. And I never could during his life. He continued to be a pretty racially hostile his entire life.
Go ahead, Ed.
No, Taft.
Yes. I have a quick one. Well, actually, I've got a personal one, but in the mid-1950s, my uncles used to go down to London to boxing matches. That's what the thing they used to do. And I remember my Uncle Morris, my Uncle Glenn, and I think it was my Uncle Trevor. They were down in London and they were traveling on the tube to the boxing match somewhere in London. And there was a person of color across from them in the tube as they traveled in the underground. And we spoke Welsh. We didn't speak English at that time in Wales. It was probably mostly in English. But one of my uncles turned around to another and says, why doesn't that fellow go back in Welsh, in Gaelic? Why doesn't that fellow go back to Africa where he came from? Well, it turned out that the person across was from Africa and was studying Welsh Gaelic in the University of Wales in Aberystwyth. And he rightly turned around to them and said, why don't you go back to where you came from in Wales, in their language? But quickly, I'm just going to tell you that my experience in 1956 or 57, I was about 7 years of age, and we didn't have a vehicle, we didn't have a car. My father was at sea, And once a week, we'd go to the market town to get our food on the bus. And I remember coming off the bus in our market town, and we're rushing through the streets, and my mother pulling my brother and I, and we saw these people going on the other side of the road. And I said to my mother, "Who's that? Just come, don't look, don't." It was Jewish people, and she said, "We don't mix with those people, and we don't have anything to do with them." And I kept on. I remember that day I kept on asking, "Why? Why don't we have anything to do with them?" I said, "Because they're different from us. That's why." And that was my first experience.
My first experience wasn't very long. I'm married to a boy from South Dakota. So there's this nut that is called a filbert that I think majority of Caucasians called it the niggertoe. And they used that word, and she was telling the grandmother was telling my kids that is the name of that nut. After I had my blood pressure, we had to research what the right name for it was for all of us together. And then we had to have a discussion why that was very inappropriate. So let's just say now the whole extended family in South Dakota calls it filbert. And that is my experience.
We have Rachel.
Yeah, this might be a bit more of a testament to my age with this story. There are many stories I could bring up, but I wanted to bring up one of my earliest memories. I was not alive during segregation or a lot of those things, so in my childhood, it was the idea that we don't see color, everyone's the same, a lot more of the equality over the equity thing. And I recall being taught in Sunday school the song, I'm not a good singer, but Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, red and yellow, black, they are precious in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. That, and being like, what is red? What is a red person? What, and having that conversation with my Sunday school teacher, and that was a very interesting thing in hindsight learning. The person who had taught me was not equipped in anything talking about race, but more so the fact that it instilled in me from a young age this idea of colorblindness, and that there is, racism is dead, that's the rights, like that sort of a thing, and having to unpack and unlearn that as a white person and really see how racist structures and racism is built into our society, and how much I am unaware of as a white person, and how much I perpetuate unknowingly as a white person. And that began with understanding that the colorblind theory is not in any way beneficial in pressing forward. And I had to learn that and really think about how did that instill in my mind, thinking I'm a good person, seeing that everyone is equal, and that I bring it back to that song that I was taught, from birth. So that's kind of my first, I know it's not an overt racism that a lot of people have shared, but that was a big learning thing for me that I've been unpacking.
That's exactly the thing, Rachel. Yep. Peg's raising her hand.
Yeah, I can tell you about mine. I grew up in southern Minnesota, Austin, and pretty white. I knew that my dad didn't like certain people. It was just there. Anyhow, I went to college in St. Louis, and so that would have been in the 60s, middle 60s. And the college I went to was kind of an avant-garde school. And I got assigned to a dorm room, and next to me was a black gal. Now the two rooms connected. So we thought, let's put the beds in one room and then have the other one just as a place to be. Well, that was fine until my father found out. And he raised such a ruckus, telling me that I either had to, move out or he wasn't going to pay for school. Well, I pretty much called his bluff on it, and did stay in. However, I became very, very aware of the difference in our color because, like I said, the school was very avant-garde. One of our assignments was to go to a SNCC meeting. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's more or less a group of Black people that are I can't think of the word, but you know, trying to move things forward. And Starkey Carmichael was the one that was running it. Well, most of my group, my class, went on buses, but Cam and I, my roommate, went with my now husband, who is very, very white. I had just come back from the Caribbean and was pretty dark myself. So we're sitting there, Cam on one side, Jane, me, and Starkey Carmichael is just shaking his fist right up at us. And I became aware that things were different. And that year was really opened up my eyes. Just the whole experience, watching, you know, the different areas of St. Louis and getting to know people. So that was a real, for a South Minnesota white girl, that was real awakening.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just clarify for people who don't know who Sandy Stevens was. Sandy Stevens was the quarterback at the University of Minnesota. He led the University of Minnesota to a national championships, the National College Football Championships. He never played in the NFL. He did play in Canada, but he never played in the NFL. Nowadays, he'd be a #1 draft choice by every club in the country. But back then, because he was Black, he never played in the NFL.
In case anybody doesn't know, SNCC was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Thank you.
Kirsten?
Hi. So this isn't my earliest memory, but it's a situation that I've been reflecting on a lot, especially as I've been reading How to Be an Anti-Racist and Me and White Supremacy. And that's that I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, which is where I'm visiting my parents right now, and then went to St. Olaf College. Both were very white experiences. And after I graduated from St. Olaf, I joined the Lutheran Volunteer Corps, and my placement was in Washington, D.C. in 1988. And I was a staff person at a shelter for women experiencing homelessness who were in recovery from crack and from crack addiction. And I'm really reflecting on how inappropriate it was for me as a white 23-year-old person who basically had no life experience to be the staff person teaching life skills classes to mostly women of color, Black, mostly African American, and I don't know if there were any indigenous, but that were older than I was, and that, you know, that I would have to speak with them if they were late in coming back after being out, or you know, basically I had power over their housing situation. And that was just so wildly inappropriate for me, being so naive. I mean, basically it was just what my white privilege and having a college degree that put me in that position, that I knew as I was doing it for those 2 years that I was out of my depth. I mean, I certainly learned a lot, but I'm really reflecting on how often young white people are put in positions of supervision or power over people that are older, much more mature, much more life experience than they, but simply don't have the formal education and the white privilege. So I'm reflecting a lot on that experience.
Joanne?
Let me switch onto audio. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So I grew up in a small community in Adrian, Michigan, and my father owned an appliance store. And
my first recollection of people who are different than us was not so much with Black people, because we only had 2 in our city, which again is part of the problem. I mean, they stand out when whoever is a minority stands out, and that's part of the problem. But anyway, I digress. But we had a lot of Hispanics in our community. And I know because my dad had an appliance store, he also kind of played banker, so he could, you know, sell things on time and then charge probably less than what the bank charged and run the books for that. And he had a lot of people who were Hispanic. And I remember my mom was a little questionable about that, just not knowing if they would come through and pay. But they did. They did. I mean, to me, that was just so heartening. They were very reliable. And even after my father passed away and mother had the store, nobody had to pay. I mean, the store had changed hands, and I think even then after my mother sold it, she still held the books, yet she would regularly get checks. And again, a lot of them were people who were not very wealthy. They were often poor, often a minority, but yet they continued to send a check into my mom because they took pride in paying the debt they had, probably knowing full well nobody was going to come after them. But that just left a real warm feeling in my heart, especially for my father, who took that kind of a risk and really tried to give those who were disadvantaged an opportunity to be able to purchase something and to be able to buy it on time and to make regular payments. And then just in closing, I found this t-shirt when I was visiting Hershey, Pennsylvania. Or actually it wasn't Hershey, but it was actually Washington, DC. And it was a store that sold, what do you call those things? Peeps. But I love it because it really points out no matter what we look like on the outside, we're always the same on the inside, regardless of the color of our skin, our hair, you name it.
I've got a story I could share a little bit. I don't exactly remember when I first heard it, but it was a long time ago. A great-grandmother, I think it was a great-grandmother on my mother's side, when she was a younger girl, her dad had a store at the base of the cliffs in St. Paul by the Mississippi River. And it was kind of a general store, I think, and probably tobacco and all sorts of things. And there were steps coming down the cliffs there from where they lived up on top. And at lunchtime, he would always come, he'd wait for her to come down the steps as a girl to stay and watch the store while he went back up above and got his lunch and came back. And she was always afraid because of all of what she called Indians that kept coming to the store when she was there. And so she sat in the chair out front and let them try shoes on her feet. And that's how she managed to survive that kind of an experience. And I kind of remember that from a long time back.
Patrick?
Yes, I'm going to check in here at this point for the first time. I was unable to make the last meeting. I grew up in a city near Adrian, Joanne. My dad was from Adrian, but I'm from Detroit. And my first experience with people across of a different race was at a hospital in Detroit, Mount Carmel. I was 10, the year 1956, and I had a hernia operation. And the question the nuns asked was, would you be willing to have a Black roommate? That wasn't even on our family's radar, that it had to be even an asked question. But in Detroit, which is now increasingly Black majority city, I had no neighbors who were Black. In Des Moines, where I moved for high school, I had locker mates who were Black. And so the experience, even in a place where there are Black people, can be all white. I'll reserve my other stories for another time, but I come from a multiracial family. And so I've heard sides from various points of view of experiences, and some were pretty disturbing back in the 60s. Thank you.
I'll jump in. My name's Steve Griffith. I grew up on the east side of St. Paul, very white in the 1950s and 60s, and a very blue collar, typical blue collar family. All the racist things that you've heard this afternoon were part of my upbringing. In high school, you know, we read the sort of popular books of the time about well, the 60s and you know what was going on with segregation and so forth. And I always felt superior to my family because I just knew that was wrong. And you know, when my father would say something or my uncle would say something, I would, you know, express my displeasure. I took a city bus to school every day. And one day, the bus driver pulled up and left me right in a big, huge puddle. And for some reason, I turned around and this racial slur of the worst type came out of my mouth at the bus driver who was Black. And I just shocked me. And at that point, I realized how deep the racism was in me. And since that time, I've realized I have to fight against that every single day, in every single situation. And you know, that's just the way it is for me. That's just something I have to do.
Noami, sorry.
Noemi, accent on the last syllable.
I will get it eventually, I promise.
I get that all the time. Just don't call me late. Anyways, my name is Noemi Trevino, and I'm Mexican American and very, very proud of it. Both of my parents are from Mexico. And in my family, my siblings, we are like the rainbow. My older sister is darker complected with kinky hair, and my younger sister is blonde and blue-eyed. Same parents, same everything. And so we have the spectrum. And my older sister is very sensitive to the microaggressions, which I don't think I had really noticed. And I am very bubbly and outspoken, and you know, I'm really shy. And I just always kept saying, you're just so hypersensitive. You're just so, you know, you receive what you radiate. And, you know, I'm just like, you're always looking for the bad and stuff. And one time we were at Dayton's and we were at the perfume, they were selling perfumes. Now, my sister, she has her doctorate. She's the one with the money. She's the one, you know, I'm just tagging along with her as my older sister. And yet the lady who was attending, you know, was addressing me and saying, how can I help you? Even though it was my sister who said, hey, I want to see that perfume, or I want to see that jewelry, or whatever it was. And that was really, really the first time that I had lived or seen that she was not being hypersensitive, you know, that she experiences that a lot. And I, being very, very fair skinned, have white privilege, even though I am Mexican American, or, you know, people wouldn't know it unless I say my name. You know, even at work, they're like, can we call you Angel? or, you know, something else, you know, and it's like, names are important, you know, and that for me was an eye opener, you know, of my own blinders. So thank you, Mother.
Very cool. I noticed we're coming up to an hour here. Is anybody else want to share? All right, so we'll stick to an hour for the meeting. And then we will start to plan the breakout rooms, and we will start to plan for people to work on topics. Amada, thank you so much. That was really, really cool.
Actually, Khadija, I have a question.
Yes.
I found this very interesting. This is Al, and I'm tempted to ask Kathy, and she doesn't. You don't have to answer right now. If we can break out this portion of the recording and share it with people on the committee, as we invite them next week to come and share their stories if they want.
I would need help with that. I will record it and upload it to the YouTube channel, so it won't have it won't be as a large of a file. And then we
Okay.
can work with Sean to see if he could help
Okay.
cut that.
If people are okay with that.